Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar today. We are so excited to have you with us. We will be talking today about a very hot topic, rent reporting, and specifically California's AB 2747. But if you're not from California, don't worry, because rent reporting is something that really any landlord can use and probably should be using nationwide as well as debt reporting. So we're going to be talking a lot about all of those topics, but before we get started, just a few items to go over. One is we are recording this whole thing as usual, and we will be emailing it to you tomorrow. So, yes, we are going over a lot of information, but you will get it all tomorrow. You'll get the slides, and you'll also get our speakers' contact information. We'll also have time at the end for Q&A, so please put your questions in the question box, not the chat, so that we can better track your questions and make sure we are able to answer them. Any questions that we can't answer, we will go ahead and follow up with you offline after the webinar. And briefly, I'm going to introduce our speakers here. We have Zach Killam, the co-founder of FrontLobby with us. Hi, Zach.
Hello.
And we have Grant Burwash, the COO of FrontLobby, and they will be talking about all of their rent reporting services and also a little bit about how it all works. So, passing it off to you both to take it from here.
All right, that's great. Thank you, Alexandra, and thank you everyone for joining today. So we are going to help save each of you tens of thousands of dollars, if not more, in your careers as a landlord. And this is going to be relevant for every landlord, whether you have one unit or many. So I'm going to share why rent reporting is critical for you, what it is, and how you're going to use it most effectively. We'll also walk you through FrontLobby's offerings. We'll talk about California's new rent reporting bill. And as Alexander mentioned, we'll take some questions to make sure you get your questions answered. So who on the call has heard of rent reporting? And Alexander, would you please launch that poll? And take a second to answer the poll to let us know. And while you're doing that, Grant and I will give a quick introduction of ourselves. So, as mentioned, I'm co-founder of FrontLobby. I'm also a retired lawyer and an entrepreneur, and I'm a landlord with about 500 rental units in 6 cities. I've been operating businesses and rental properties for over 25 years, but I was actually a customer of FrontLobby before joining the team. So when I started as a landlord, my business partner and I were doing everything ourselves, including repairs and chasing rents. And pretty quickly, we started dealing with late rents and then delinquencies. And I'm sure, like many of you, it was gut-wrenching to deal with. So we signed up to use FrontLobby to report unpaid rent to the credit bureaus as a solution. And in the first 6 months of us being a customer, we recovered $65,000. So it was pretty incredible experience and encouraged me then to reach out and join the team. But FrontLobby is really a cause that our members and us are building to protect our industry. And we've saved tens of millions of dollars for our members. And I'm excited to bring the solution to you today. Grant, do you want to share your background?
Yeah, for sure. I'm Grant. I'm also part of the founding team with FrontLobby. I came into it from an athletic background and I've worked in tech for about 10 years and have been investing in real estate for even longer than that. So when I met Zach and kind of the rest of the team and we started talking through FrontLobby, I was coming at it from a housing provider standpoint. I got the benefits having been a landlord myself. And interesting, as we were launching this program, I actually became a user of it as the tenant side. So partway through kind of building this, we needed a presence in the US. I moved down to the States and used it to help build my credit by reporting those on-time monthly payments. So it's been kind of neat to not just try and introduce some new technology into the real estate space and get to speak with a bunch of housing providers around how they operate in various different jurisdictions, but it's been also neat to kind of introduce something net new and see the benefits for our members. So we're excited to share some of this new legislation and kind of go through this kind of hot topic and learn a little bit more about how you all operate your businesses. So thanks for having us.
All right, so the poll results show that 40% said no, 9% said yes, but I thought it was just for tenants. And I think 51% said yes. So those are good results. If you haven't heard of rent reporting, you would not be alone. Only 27% of typical housing providers know what rent reporting is. Now that's expected because we've only been trailblazing it in the last 6 years. But anyway, now you will know. So the big question is, why do you need to care about rent reporting? So the first reason you care is because it helps your tenants, which helps you. They can finally use rent to build their credit report, which means they can save money each month on their car loans and credit cards and also access credit. So this means they're more financially secure each month to pay the rent and they'll prioritize paying rent because it helps them to also improve their life. Now, for the vast majority of renters, this is going to be wonderful news. We see credit score increases between 36 to 84 points in the first 6 months. And this is life-changing given how important credit is for financial wellness today. Experian estimates that 1 in 3 renters have little or no established credit history, translating into over 15 million renters. So in 2022, we released a multi-year study that we did with Equifax. And the result was that 48% of the renters who reported through FrontLobby were able to get a credit score solely based on that rent history. So this is a value add that you're going to want to provide to attract great tenants, and it works very well for them and for you. The second reason you care is it helps make your screening process easier. So 87% of tenants report wanting to have their rent payments reported. By informing your applicants that you report monthly rent to the credit bureaus if rent is unpaid, then the bad actors are going to self-select out. That's going to save you the time and hassle and leave you with the responsible applicants. This October, a major property manager shared a report that about half of the rental applications that they'd received in the last 6 months were fraudulent. So that's pretty wild that it's that high. And a study released at the beginning of the year shared that 70% of major apartment landlords said that they'd seen an increase in the fraudulent rental applications in the past 12 months. So you definitely want to get ahead of that. The third reason you care is because the old adage, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So when someone doesn't pay, you immediately incur time and hassle, and pretty soon, the filing and the legal costs to deal with it. But there's a reason that every other industry reports to credit bureaus, and that's because it's effective to get paid on time. And so with this solution, now our industry can take advantage of that and report as well. Now, nothing works on everyone, but 77% of renters are more likely to pay on time if rent reporting is being utilized. So you too can save yourself the time and money and hassle and report to prevent late payments. Alexander, I think there's another poll that we are supposed to launch. Have you experienced late or unpaid rent? You can take a minute to answer that. So the fourth reason you care is fewer evictions for you. National data indicates that non-payment of rent is the primary reason for eviction filings. In Pennsylvania, a 2023 analysis revealed that over 90% of eviction cases involved past due rent. And last December, 96% of eviction notices were for non-payment of rent in LA. In New York, the eviction process can take 6 months, sometimes longer. Every state is different, but for small landlords, the fear is the same. The non-payment of rent can threaten our financial stability. So we want to get ahead of this. Small landlords are significantly impacted by delays, often being forced to use personal savings and credit lines, and even facing foreclosure while waiting for tenant disputes to resolve. So rent reporting prevents many of these from happening in the first place. The fifth reason you care is that using FrontLobby's rent reporting has proven to be 22 times more effective at collecting debts than using collection agencies. So the average recovery rate for collection agencies, specifically for unpaid residential rent, is only between 6 to 10%, so very low. In fact, it actually collecting rent comes last as the hardest debt to collect out of 75 other services. So remember what I said, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If you are rent reporting, then that's on their credit report. So they can't skip out on you and rent somewhere else because that next landlord will see that debt, and then the debtor is going to have to call you to pay it off before they can rent a new place. And you want to prevent the debtor from renting a new place before they pay you. And the sixth reason you care is helping the housing community. So we all constantly hear in the media about, one housing crisis or another. Improving the financial health and accountability of your renters helps our economy, and it helps small landlords afford to improve our properties and provide more. Because, of course, you're not experiencing the costs of delinquency. Okay, so hopefully that overview causes you to begin to care at least a little bit about rent reporting and how it can benefit you. But since the concept is still reasonably new, let me explain how it works. So each month, landlords or property managers report tenants' rent payments through a rent reporting service like FrontLobby. The reported data is shared with major credit bureaus, just like credit card or loan payments are. And then once reported, the rent payments appear on the tenant's credit file and can then impact their credit history and scores, just like any other credit obligation does. FrontLobby is unique in our capabilities because we allow all landlords, no matter their size or technology, to report. Meaning whether you have one unit or many, you can impact your tenant's credit. Now we're even more unique because we allow landlords to report both on time and missing payments, so debts. This means that rent will show up on your tenant's credit reports and impact their credit scores both positively and negatively based on if they choose to pay on time or not. You do not need, this is important, you do not need to go through the process of getting a court or a tribunal order to report debts. That's a question we get a lot. So I hope that makes the process a bit more clear. In the US, it's estimated that just under 50% of rental housing units are provided by small and medium landlords. So we are the only platform that enables any size landlord, as I said, one or more units, to do rent reporting. And this will enable you to prevent delinquencies, improve your screening, increase on-time payments, and recover the debts so that you can grow your housing portfolio. And hopefully it'll take away a little stress as well. Now, the renters that you want to be in your housing units will be happy that they can build their credit and improve their credit scores, and they will also become more financially stable. Renters are, of course, our landlords' customers, so we want them to be happy and to pay on time.
Great. I have a quick question, Zach, just to pause you here. What if I rent to a lot of students who are new to the country and they're trying to build their credit? Will this eventually help them as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, rent reporting can help anyone to build their credit, and that includes students, that includes, young people who are moving out for the first time, and really anyone with poor credit for whatever reason. So, many of my tenants have thanked me. But, I remember a couple in particular. So one who he wasn't able to get a credit card, and then through rent reporting, he was able to get one for the first time in 10 years for, previous financial mistakes he had made. Nothing. He'd always paid his rent on time. But that enabled him to stop using the expensive payday loans with the really high interest rates to have cash in between paychecks, because then he could get a credit card and he could utilize that. And so he was financially better off as a result, and called to thank me personally. And another one I had, which always stands out, and I like to share this story, was a couple, and they were able to improve their credit over the course of a few years through rent reporting, which eventually enabled them to qualify for a mortgage and ultimately buy a house. So it can be very impactful for consumers.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, my pleasure. I will now pass it over to Grant.
Great. Thanks. I see we've got a lot of good questions that are coming through the chat. And reminder, if you have things you want us to ask, you can drop them in the Q&A and we'll make sure to get to the end. Most of the things that are going to be asked, we'll go through. So, now that Zach's introduced a little bit more about rent reporting, I want to talk a bit about FrontLobby. And then just so you're kind of prepared, we'll go through some best practices for how to implement it. And then we'll talk at the end specifically about the new California bill. So if you're still interested in that, of course, don't worry. We're going to get to all that. Just take a little bit. So FrontLobby today, we're now a community of actually over 50,000 landlords and property managers. And just to reiterate what Zach said, we are unique in the rent reporting space because we do allow housing providers of all sizes to report both on time and missed monthly payments. It's pretty innovative in the space because whether you have one unit or thousands, you can actually report. So you are legally compliant when you're using FrontLobby. This has been confirmed by us doing extensive reviews with the relevant regulators. So you can rest easy knowing that you are legally compliant when you use the platform. In addition, we've been recognized and promoted by Equifax and the subject of one of their major rent reporting studies, which Zach was talking about earlier. One of the big benefits of the platform is it actually doesn't matter how you receive your rent. So whether they pay by Zelle or some other way, you can still report that rental data. You can also start reporting at any time. So this will especially be relevant when we talk about California, but if you have tenants that are living in your property, you can start reporting them today. You can start reporting at the start of the lease, or if they move out with a debt, you can even report that as well. So it doesn't really matter the timing. You can also remember what Zach had said, like you don't ever need consent when you're reporting a debt. And a judgment is never required to report unpaid rent and utilities that are outlined in the lease. So the only instance where you'd actually need a judgment is if someone moves out with damages or there's additional legal fees you're trying to garnish, or if there's, lease breakage components. When you're trying to capture that, you can report unpaid rent and utilities. If you do then get a judgment, you'd simply update the balance you're reporting. So important distinction, consent's never required, and remember a judgment isn't required for unpaid rent. But don't worry, the platform will walk you through all this and we help make sure that you're protected.
Thanks, Grant.
All right, if you want to jump to the next slide there, Zach.
Yep.
Yep, perfect. So one delinquency that we've seen from our members on average costs about $10,000 to $15,000. And this, of course, will depend on your jurisdiction. That includes the debt, your time, as well as the costs and fees associated with covering that. To report on a current tenant within FrontLobby, you do need a premium membership. So this is only $239 per year, and that allows you to report 20 leases. It's a cost-effective way to prevent delinquencies and help to eliminate any sort of late payments. The platform also handles all automated rent reminders and communication with your tenants. These are compliant as well as effective. When reporting current tenants, we do require the tenants to provide consent for their on-time payments to be reported. So consent is not required to report the debt to the credit bureaus. So everyone can use FrontLobby at any time during the lease or after the debt is owed. You will need the tenant's name, their date of birth, or their social security number to report. So if you don't capture the social, no worries, you would just need their date of birth. The reporting the debt of a current tenant provides an effective and timely leverage tool to help make sure those tenants are held accountable and pay you on time. So rent reporting can save you time and money because you're starting to do it while they're living in your property, and you can start applying that pressure before you even start with the tribunals or even have to go through the eviction process, which is why it's been so effective at reducing those delinquencies and preventing those debts.
Grant, quick question here. So in a scenario where I have a tenant currently that's living at the property and they didn't pay rent last month, and I'm afraid that they're not going to pay rent again this month, what should I do?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. I have dealt with that exact situation, unfortunately, many times. So it's pretty amazing how once they realize that not paying rent can actually impact them, then they call you and they pay right away. The problem really has been, and why there's so many of the situations that you just described, is that not paying rent has not impacted credit reports in the past. So, many intentionally delinquent individuals have gotten away with it. They'll pay all their other bills first, and then rent is the last priority. So I've seen rent reporting work very effectively many times to get people back onto track and to paying on time. And what you would want to do in that situation for any of the attendees today is add that lease to your FrontLobby account and then let the platform's automations go to work, because there's a lot of automations within it that happen behind the scenes, both, as Grant mentioned, to keep you protected, but also, of course, to have the desired impact. So it's going to create accountability by contacting them, warning them of the potential impact to their credit if they don't catch up right away, and provide that motivation to pay you back. It's super easy. All you have to do is update the amount owing to you each month. So if there isn't an amount owing, it will reset to $0 each month and you don't have to do anything. But the automation, even then, will still keep creating that accountability. So you want to add your lease information to the platform for each lease. The automation will create accountability and rewards for paying on time, and you don't have to do anything unless you're owed a debt. And then you just enter the amount owed, and the system will do the rest.
Love that. So
Is that
convenient.
clear?
Yeah, very clear, very clear. And I think a good solution that's more proactive than what we normally do, which is just wait until it gets to the point where you have to serve a notice, right? So this
Yeah.
is well before that, and hopefully that resolves it and doesn't get to that point.
Yeah, I mean that's right. That's why all of us are subjected to regular reporting to the credit bureaus for all of our credit products, right? I mean, our credit card company reports every single month because they know, it doesn't work for everyone, but it's going to dramatically reduce the number of delinquencies that they face.
Absolutely.
Yeah. A question popped up. Zach, you can jump to the next slide as we're getting going,
Oh,
but I think it's a good thing to touch on. So they're asking how, like, what means
okay.
a late payment or a debt that gets
Mhm.
reported. So the way it works within the platform is any outstanding debt from the previous month gets reported in the middle of the month. So essentially what that means is right now we've reported February data. So as long as the debt is outstanding, 30 plus days, which would be the end of the calendar month in most situations, then that information gets reported the following month to the credit bureaus. So just if someone is 2 days late and you enter it into the system, it doesn't automatically get reported. It still has to be owing 30 days later at the end of the calendar month, and then it gets going, which is why we have the notifications as well. It just tries to provide some of that proactive and positive conversation. Ultimately, we don't want debts to go on credit reports. We want tenants to reach out. We want to have solutions that come forward. And we want to ultimately, of course, have them pay on time. But, in some situations, that's not always possible. So, that delay is helpful from that standpoint.
Yeah, and it also helps to foster conversations around potentially a payment plan. Often in this conversation, we're talking about someone who's intentionally delinquent, but of course, this can happen to someone who's not intentionally delinquent. And so usually what we see in those instances is it creates the conversation, and then the landlord and their tenant will work out a payment plan that avoids having any negative impact on the individual's credit, but still provides that accountability and ensures that rent is paid.
Great idea.
All right. So now let's talk about a situation where you have a former tenant that owes a debt. So the debt reporting product that we have refers specifically to the reporting of a debt of a former tenant. This is a one-time fee. It's $99, and you don't pay any percentage of the amount you collect. So the debt will remain on the credit file for 7 years in the US, and the automated communications we've talked about will continue to encourage them to pay you every month until you mark it as paid. So when reporting a former tenant, you don't need their current address. So as you will report using the rental address that you rented from them, and again, you'll just need some basic information from them. So their name, their date of birth, or their social if you have that as well. The email address is obviously helpful because that's where the notifications go out to. The debt, of course, will be visible to all future creditors, making sure that you continue to remain top of mind and are first in line to get paid. So when you're thinking of this, even if it's from a couple of years ago, they've moved out. If you didn't pursue it as far as getting an order or judgment, then you can still report. Okay, I think we've got a next poll question here. Just kind of curious. So for those of you on the call, do you currently have a process for handling the unpaid debt? And I'd imagine this will vary greatly based on the size of your portfolio, but it's always good to know kind of what types of processes people have and if you have something.
Right. And another quick scenario I want to throw by you as well. So, what if you have a tenant that broke their lease? They moved out owing damages and 1 month of unpaid rent. How do you handle it at that point?
Yeah, great question. And yeah, I've had those too. And actually, just a few months ago, I had one. So I reported a tenant who moved out owing as about $1,500. And even though they knew rent reporting existed, they just refused to pay. And I guess they figured they'd get away with it. So in any event, I added the debt to the ledger and the system automations did its thing. And the week that it hit their credit report, as Grant mentioned, there's a delay. The week that it hit their credit report, I immediately received a message asking if they were to pay me that day, would I remove it from their credit report right away? And so, of course, they paid, the full amount immediately. So, yes, you can report former tenants who've moved out owing a debt, and the system will do all the same things. It'll create the accountability, it'll contact them, and it'll encourage them to pay, and it will hit their credit reports if they don't. Um, Again, important to note, in that situation, you don't need a court or tribunal order to report the debt. Just as, banks and credit card companies also don't need an order to report debts to the credit bureaus. Um, but the damages portion is dealt with slightly different. So you can report unpaid rent without an order, but for the damages portion you mentioned, that can only be reported if you do have an order about what those damages are. Okay. So on FrontLobby, our product for this is called debt reporting. So it's debt reporting for a former tenant who owes a debt.
Great. So in this case, you would use the debt reporting product to report the damages, but they have to go to court first to verify that those damages, right, are actually correct. And if it's rent, they don't have to go to court, and then they would do it through the rent reporting system if they just moved out, right?
Slightly different. Zach may have
Totally
frozen
different.
there. So
Okay.
let me
I
just
was like,
extend
that's
on.
a long
Yeah.
pause. He's really
He's
thinking.
being thought-provoking. Yeah, great question. So let's just expand on Zach's example.
Yes.
Because it's a former tenant, what you're going to use is the debt reporting product. So that's the one-time fee. Because they're former, it's always debt reporting. So let's just say that he was reporting that $1,500. They didn't pay. At the same time, Zach's gone through, he's gone and then got an order or a judgment from the local tribunal system. And there's an additional $5,000 in damages. Essentially, once he gets that order, he would simply update for it to show the total outstanding balance, which, at that point in time is going to be $6,500. And that would then be the amount that's being reported to the credit bureaus. Then, of course, if it all gets paid off, then you go from there. So the beauty about an order or judgment is it's a clear definition around the value that's going, which is why in some situations, if there's hesitation around calculating the accuracy of it, some people will just wait until they obtain a judgment, but you don't have to do it as long as it's clearly defined in a lease. And the big reason around damages and additional fees like lease breakage or other legal costs and things is because there's often a lot of ambiguity around what that dollar value is. And any consumer has the right to dispute information that they believe is inaccurate on their credit files, which in most instances isn't a big deal. They can dispute it with us, they can dispute it with the credit bureaus. And essentially what we do is go back to the housing provider, ask for the lease breakdown of how the debt or the information was calculated, and of course any judgments or things that they have to support it. We then go to the tenant and say, great, you said you paid this rent, like provide proof of payment or some other sort of documentation that shows you don't owe it. So
Right.
that's that's ended up being how that works.
Yeah, and then it would be really on them to prove that they paid. So
That's right.
that's great. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and I don't mention disputes to scare people. It's a common aspect when reporting rental data, but it's important that you have kind of your ducks in the row. So the information you're reporting is accurate. Make sure you have a signed lease. Like, don't try and be punitive or any sort of way. And, having dealt with the dispute since day one, and working with that department, most get ruled in favor of the landlord as long as they're complying and actually reporting accurate information. Someone can't just say, I don't want to pay, this is wrong, and it gets wiped out. That's just not how it works.
Sure. So I'm going to share the results from that poll question that we asked just a moment ago. It looks like we have about half of you saying that you do struggle with process for handling unpaid rent. And some of you actually do have a process that works well. 18% of you, 32% do have a process, but you're interested in trying something new. So maybe something that's a little more convenient, less manual, right? Those automations really help with that. So really interesting results here, because I'm hoping that those of you that do feel like you struggle with this will feel like you have a good solution after this webinar's over.
Can you guys see my screen again? I apologize for that. My internet, of course, cut out in a very timely
Yes.
manner.
You're back. Welcome back.
Okay.
Everything looks great. Let's
Good.
keep the show on the road here.
Awesome. Well, in light of that, those of you that have great debt recovery systems, kudos to you. That's awesome. We love hearing that. For those of you who want to add to it or looking for something different, here's just some steps for our recommendations, how you can implement rent reporting as best practices to operate your business. So step one, obviously you can sign up. We have a special QR code on this next screen that Zach's going to share, as well as there's a code called AAOA10 that when you upgrade to premium, you can receive a $10 credit on your account. So this is kind of the first step. You kind of make sure that you have the platform put in place that you can get going. Second is use your listing to highlight that you offer rent reporting to credit bureaus as an added benefit to applicants. This helps prevent those professional tenants from contacting you, and it helps you attract those great tenants. Nobody likes wasting our time with bookings or showings or engaging with applicants that aren't qualified. So this is a really great first step to take. Next, you can include the clauses we provide in your rental applications. This lets potential tenants know that you will be reporting unpaid rent to the credit bureaus. Bad actors will move on, and the great tenants will appreciate the additional benefits. If applicable to you, also include the clauses and the California tenant notice, which we'll talk about later in your lease agreement. These clauses are free. They're in the footer of our website, and we'll also be sharing the link within the webinar. So if you need those and you can't find them, just let anyone on our team know, and we're happy to provide them. Well, Alexander and the AO team are always highlighting this, but remember to always do your credit checks as part of your tenant screening. Pay special attention if there is rental data on the file, as this is a really good indicator of their likelihood to pay on time. Review the information in full, and of course, ask the applicant relevant questions just to make sure you understand the report. Start using FrontLobby by adding your tenant information. It takes only a couple minutes per lease, and you would only need the basic information. Again, name, email, date of birth, social if you have it, and the rental details like the amount and address. Rent reporting does not need to start at the beginning. You can start anytime. When a payment is missed, the system will automatically notify your tenants, encouraging them to make payment and avoid impacting their credit. Each month, it only takes a couple minutes to update. As the protections, the system automatically assumes that tenants have paid on time and in full each month. So you only really have to make any sort of updates if there's a debt for a current tenant's month. For former tenants, you'd simply enter the debt once, then you don't have to update it again until they pay you. It's $99 with a premium membership, and you keep 100% of what's recovered. This system has already helped landlords prevent and recover tens of millions of dollars in rent, as Zach said, because it's kind of that full system that can start before they move in, provide some leverage while they're in the property, and then it can help you in those situations when someone does actually move out with a debt.
Got it. And then I have another final scenario here for you all. Thanks for sharing these steps. Very, very important, I think, to go through all of them. What if I have a few tenants from several years ago that still owe me money? Never pursued them with collection agencies or bothered obtaining a judgment or order. Is there any benefit in reporting them now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I personally, well, in my business, have recovered over $200,000 from past tenants
Wow.
who I never pursued with collection agencies or obtained an order for. So you have up to 7 years from the date of first delinquency to report them. And what I've found is that some will pay within, a month of hitting their credit report, and others, it can take years before they need their credit. And then all of a sudden they realize that, uh-oh, they have to pay you or they're not going to get the credit that they, all of a sudden want or need. I remember one of our earliest customers back in 2020. So she was owed $35,000 from one tenant, an enormous sum of money. And she signed up and reported the debt. And this is wild. 2 weeks later, the tenant paid the full $35,000 to her, all in one payment, the full $35,000. So, that delinquent individual obviously had the money all along, and they were just refusing to pay for whatever reason. But as soon as there was actually a consequence, they paid. So yes, you definitely want to report the former tenants who moved out owing you money.
Yeah, especially if it's been a long time. I imagine people's finances change over time. Like you said, they might have really needed to have that off their credit in that moment, and then all of a sudden it gets reported. So
Yeah,
absolutely. What a great story.
Yeah, no, but I mean it's a great question, and you're right that finances do change over time and people's needs change over time. And so while that individual who moved out yesterday and owed a bunch of money and you reckon that they don't have the ability to pay, that may be true today. But 3 years down the line, it could be quite different, and all of a sudden they want to be able to access that credit, perhaps to lease a car. So,
Yeah,
good question.
and as you can imagine, people's situations for whether they find the rent reporting for their current tenants' debts or they end up using debt reporting for former tenants more often, it really depends on jurisdiction. So,
Mhm.
states like New York, where it can take a really long time to move someone out, like starting to report them while they're in the property is actually a very, very powerful step because in parallel, you're often pursuing an eviction or you're often pursuing judgments. Other areas, maybe Texas, where you can get someone out fairly quickly, you find that people tend to gravitate more towards that debt reporting because if someone doesn't pay, it's pretty quick to get them out. Then they can pursue them through the local tenancy branches if they choose to, or they end up just starting to report the debt through us. And they find that works out. So each jurisdiction is slightly different, which is why kind of our tools offer a few different options just based on what situation you're in.
Mm, great.
Okay. Now let's get to our final topic of the day, which is the very specific California legislation for AB 2747. So this will apply to some of you, but hopefully by now you've recognized that reporting rental data can be helpful to your business, regardless of where you're located. So as we've shared, the reporting of rental data and having rental data on your credit file is a massive financial well-being benefit. And this legislation was passed to help bring those benefits of on-time reporting to more tenants. That's the goal of it. Other states like Colorado have discussed similar legislation, but right now the only state with this type of legislation is in California. This bill states that certain landlords in California must offer positive rent reporting to their tenants. They must offer this to all current tenants and start offering it to all new leases by April 1st. And an offer to report positive payments must be made to your tenants once a year. So you're probably wondering if this applies to you, which is the very logical question to ask. This bill is intended to apply to larger landlords, specifically if you own a building with over 15 units. This means this likely won't apply to a bunch of you on the call. And if you are exempt from this, you will be exempt from this legislation if you own a building that has less than 15 units, or if you own multiple properties, but you are not a REIT, a corporation, or an LLC, or at least one member is a corporation. Assisted housing developments are also exempt. So you can see that this really is intended to be towards those larger apartments with 15 or more units, or corporations, REITs, LLCs that own multiple properties. So, but whether this applies to you or not, you absolutely should use rent reporting to help your tenants and protect yourself, of course, from the delinquencies and recover any sort of rental debts. So if this does apply to you, here's what you need to know. This is an optional program for the tenants. They can opt in and they can opt out of positive rent reporting at any time. To prevent any gaps in the credit files, which the credit bureaus hate, if a tenant does opt out of rent reporting, they can't start reporting for at least 6 months. As the housing provider, you can pass along the cost of offering this to your tenants that participate, up to a maximum of $10 or the amount that it actually costs you. If your tenant stops paying for the service, you can stop reporting them after 30 days, but you can't be punitive. So really what this means is you can't report the unpaid rent reporting fee to the credit bureaus, and you also can't evict them or take any sort of other measures if they choose not to pay or stop paying for the fee. It's important to remember that this bill only applies to on-time reporting. You can still report debts to the credit bureaus anytime. Consent is not required, and the tenant cannot opt out. So if they owe you a debt, you can always report. So I'll say it again. This legislation specifically applies to offering an opt-in and opt-out program for positive rent reporting. It doesn't supersede or overwrite your right to report debts within California. So this is why we recommend using the rent reporting for all your tenants. You can pay for the program yourself so you can benefit from offering both the positive as well as have the protection from reporting the debts. I'm sure there'll be a couple questions on that, but we can, of course, circle back to that at the end. So a critical component of this legislation is notifying your tenants. You're responsible for offering this to all your new tenants when the lease begins, as well as offering it to your current tenants annually. The notice you provide the tenants can be made by email or mail, but it must include the cost, if there is any, a confirmation that it's an opt-in and opt-out program, and the steps that are required to do so. You must also mention the credit bureaus that you're reporting to, and a way for the tenants to provide consent in the form of an e-signature or regular signature is required. Most of this is, of course, handled digitally within our platform, and you can actually see a copy of the notice that we have, as well as some step-by-step instructions on the next slide. So Zach, if you just want to jump to the next one. So here's where you'll be able to kind of use the QR code depending on who we are. There's a link which we can drop in. This article kind of walks through a lot of the specifics around what we're talking about today, step-by-step instructions, a notice that you can use to add to your lease. It's a pretty helpful tool to take away. All right, so if this does apply to you, how are you actually going to implement it? Well, we make implementing this program pretty easy for you in a couple ways. First, we offer a PDF version available on the last screen, and we'll share the link, that you can add to your leases along with our consent clauses. This lets the tenants know what to expect and follows the legislation if you're using our platform. Conveniently, we also provide this notification by email to all tenants if you enter them into the platform. So when a tenant moves in, you add them to your premium account, and the notice will automatically be sent out to the tenant in California. The tenants can create a free account. They can opt in and opt out of the platform anytime, so you don't actually have to track it. We also have important renter protections, like we verify the renter's ID, we allow them to opt out of the platform, and provide you with the protections that, of course, if there is a debt, then that can get reported automatically. This is no work for your great tenants. You just add their details, you turn on the rent reporting, the tenant gets notified, and then you only would need to adjust the balance if there is a debt. And that's
Yeah, I think that last point quite important to reiterate is it is extremely easy to utilize the platform for this purpose. It's minutes, and then the automations will take all the rest of the steps that are required to be taken.
Yeah, we've even built in things like if the tenant opts out, they can't re-opt in for 6 months. So they can use the consent toggle and kind of use their e-signature anytime. But we have those protections built in that if they do opt out, you're not going to worry about having to track, okay, was this 6 months ago or things? The tenant ends up handling most of that. So you'll see that most of our stuff is handled digitally within the platform. So the notice is going to be slightly different and guiding people towards the application, knowing that that's where we deal with everything. Right. So on this last page, of course, we're happy to answer any questions. I'm sure Alexander is going to pop in here any second now and kind of go through and ask. Happy to spend through and go through these. If you find it's more relevant, you can always book a one-on-one call with our team at any time. So whether you're in California or anywhere in the States or Canada, for that matter, if you own properties there, we operate in Canada as well. So if you feel like it's more effective to walk through your situation, kind of come up with a solution, kind of craft something together, we're happy to do that as well. And you can use this link to book a one-on-one call with one of our specialists. But beyond that, that's kind of the end of the formal part of our conversation, and we can turn it over to some questions here now.
Wonderful. So thank you so much for going through all of that information. So many questions. I think we might have just like a record-breaking number of questions. Everyone, if you do have questions, please, please, please put them in the question box, not the chat. So that you have two options it should be at the bottom or the top of your screen. One of them says chat, one of them says Q&A. Make sure you're putting your questions in the Q&A because the chat is getting kind of out of control. So we're going to go to Q&A first, make sure we address all of those questions. And then if we don't get to some of these, then we'll go ahead and follow up with you after the webinar. I also wanted to launch another poll question here real quick, which is the one-on-one. I know there's a QR code up here, but in case for some reason the QR code isn't working or you all would like to answer it as a poll, I'm going to put it up as a poll question as well. So the first question I want to bring up here is one from David Contreras. He's asking, could this be used to report good tenants that have paid rent on time for years? Can we go backwards basically? Or would it be only for rent reporting moving forward when we start with the website?
Yeah, right now it's built to be moving forward. So the bureaus now do allow some historical stuff. So we're looking at building out some infrastructure to allow
Oh,
historical payments, but that is not available at this point in time. So when you're looking at reporting positives, we understand there's a bit of a gap for how that information is accepted, but they can sign up and it can start impact. And speaking from experience, I moved to the US. I didn't really have credit. I moved back a second time and actually used rent reporting to build credit again. And because of the size of the payment that happens every single month, it's several $1,000s usually, or whatever it is for an individual, a positive payment that hits, it tends to have a pretty quick and effective improvement on someone's credit. So of course, reverse goes for a debt, but usually we see a pretty significant jump within the first 6 months for positive reporting.
nice. Also, just from Shelley, do you have to write on your lease agreement that you will report rent? Can you report it if you don't have this on your lease agreement?
Yes. So two components here that I want to be clear on. In California, we talk about the tenant notice, and that's a requirement with the legislation. So you must provide that notice. So that's why we say just add it to your leases, and then you can also use the email version that comes through the platform. When we talk about our consent clauses, those aren't required. So within our platform, we handle consent for on-time payments, and of course, consent isn't required when you're reporting debts. But the reason why we like having those clauses within your lease agreements is it helps you have that conversation with an individual. So if Zach's renting to me and he's actually reading through the lease, like I'm going to highlight that I'm going to report rental data to the credit bureaus. And it's really a way for me to have a conversation with him that hopefully he self-selects out if he's not inclined to pay, or it kind of gets him a little bit more excited. But either way, it's that first touch point that you can have the conversation that if you're ever delinquent, this information is getting reported.
Also here, Janice asking about utilities. So does your service include reporting for the water bill, which I have to pay and bill tenants for?
Yes. So we handle utilities from the standpoint that we realize most of them fluctuate. So when you're reporting rental data, you're going to enter the total rent amount. So let's say it's $1,500 that I pay in rent. I may be responsible for components of the utilities. We're not going to add that on every monthly basis. So what you essentially would report is that $1,500 in rent. If utilities are included in that, great. But that's what's going to get reported. If they don't pay the utility bill, then you could add that to the amount of debt that's owing. So because they fluctuate on an ongoing basis, we don't adjust the amount that's reported every single month on a positive side. But if they don't get reported, you simply add that to the outstanding balance that gets reported. Is that clear, or did I confuse that situation?
No, I think I understood, but
Okay.
if that didn't make sense to the person who asked, you can definitely follow up here with the speakers. Okay, another question here. How does the payment structure, I've seen a few questions about that work. So it's $239 per year. That includes 20 leases, but then you can add more for $1 each, right? If you have more, how does the payment work? Was Yiddi's question.
Yeah, everything in the platform, it just scales based on your size. So,
Mhm.
if you're fairly large and you want to deal with integrations or something, of course, reach out to our team. I don't want to discuss that on the call. It can get complicated, but
Yeah.
yes, essentially 239 per year, a dollar
Okay.
per lease. Now you can have multiple tenants on a lease. We essentially call that on based on how many leases you have within the system. And the credit card that you have just gets billed monthly. So we charge you each month based on your utilization. So the number of leases, current leases that you have, or if you've turned on any former tenant debt reporting, you'd also just get billed once a month for those.
Got it. And Eddie asking if there's any minimum rentals. There's not, right? They can, even if you just have one rental, you can still sign up.
Correct. Yeah, the
Okay.
premium membership we have, that's 239, which a lot of your members, I know the average is about 24 units that your members have. So most of them are going to be at or around that premium membership covering your entire portfolio. But it also gives you discounts on things like your former tenant debt reporting as well.
Yes. Also, I saw a few questions about whether FrontLobby collects judgments or just reports.
Yeah. We don't collect judgments probably in the way you're thinking, meaning we don't consolidate judgments and prevent them or present them to other housing providers. So within the platform, you can store your lease agreements, you can store judgments on the lease, as a way to help, but we don't provide some sort of platform where housing providers can look for judgments that apply to an individual. So what we specialize in is the ability to consolidate the rental data from all individuals and report that to the credit bureaus.
And Lisa asking, can we use rent reporting for commercial tenants as well, specifically in California?
Yeah, we don't report business data. What we do is if you have a signatory on a lease or like a personal guarantor, then of course you can report that. Or if it's a business, but it's actually signed by an individual. So those are the instances where we do allow the reporting for commercial tenants, but we don't report business credit.
John asking, do we need an email for each tenant?
Yeah, if one's available, you should add it, specifically because the notifications go out, and we recognize in some situations that you don't. And so that's not a problem. You can get around that as well.
Yeah, you really want email to take advantage of the effectiveness and all of the automations that the platform provides you to get that debt repaid, or obviously to notify the person whom you want to assist with building their credit.
Great. Larry asking, in reference to the 7-year time frame that the debt stays on a credit report, is 7 years the drop dead time, or can it be extended on the record?
That's really determined by the credit bureaus, that they have set that statutes of limitations. So there's nothing really that you or us can do to help circumvent that. It's really designed that it allows that after a debt's existed for so long, if it doesn't pay, it falls off that individual's credit file as an opportunity for them to kind of continue to build credit. So there is not really a way to circumvent that.
Unfortunately. Brad asking, are judgments added to credit reporting agencies automatically?
The judgments aren't. So the credit bureaus are designed to ingest certain data. So that's why we have things like the property address. We ask for the rental amount because that goes on their credit file. We ask for the balance that's owing. And so when you look at a credit file, there's standard data that exists within each collection or each trade line. Credit bureaus aren't designed to handle kind of PDFs or bulk documents like judgments, which is why we kind of require, or we look to translate the pertinent components of that into the name, address, amount owing, and then that's the information that gets reported. So the contents of the judgment can get reported, but the credit bureaus aren't going to take kind of the bulk PDF version of it and make that available to other housing providers.
Yeah, and to add to that, since 2017, civil judgments were removed from all credit reports. And so there are no civil judgments that are reported anymore, but they are still reported in a sense as a collection, right? If the money is owed, as we were talking as debt reporting goes, but it doesn't say that it's a judgment, and it doesn't appear as its own, I guess, judgment line item. So it's a little different. That's why it's good to report renters, because otherwise it doesn't appear on their credit report, which is surprising, I think, to a lot of people to find out. Also here, let's see, so a lot of questions about exemptions to the California law. For that one, I would say definitely consult with an attorney. We have a legal chat that I can provide in the follow-up email as well. If you just want to chat with an attorney, it's a lot less expensive than calling one, and they can basically, go through, question by question that you have about whether it applies to you, just online chat. And so that's $5 for a 7-day trial. And then after that, I think it's like 50, $60 a month. I'll send you guys the link in the follow-up email, so keep a lookout for that. Okay.
I'll maybe reiterate just what those are. So,
Yeah.
If you're wondering if this applies to you, like, first question, do you live in California? Good place to start. Second is, if any of your buildings have over 15 units, then yes, you have to offer that for those buildings, right? Best practice, I'd offer it to all of them, but like you offer it for that space. It applies to you as a landlord. If you own multiple properties and they're all under 15 units, if you're a corporation, a REIT, or an LLC, where at least one member is a corporation, you must comply with this legislation. So it's really for those larger unit properties, or those corporation REIT type situations where you're owning multiple properties. Like, that's who they're going after to force them to provide the rental option for their tenants. Again, specifics, of course, ask a attorney, you can ask us as well, but that's really a gist to hopefully help provide some understanding.
And then, Alexander, I also want to reiterate that whether any of us are subject to that bill or not, we all should still be doing rent reporting because of the associated benefits from it. And it's really easy to do.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there's not really a downside that I see as far as rent reporting goes. And I mean, if you can even pass along the cost to the tenants, it's even less of a no-brainer. It's not really a lot
Right.
of work on your end. So yeah, I agree. There's really not a whole reason here. Some people asking, is this required in, X, Y, or Z state? And yeah, it's not yet, but also why not? So that's just my opinion. But I
Yeah.
think based on what we've heard, it is beneficial for both landlords and tenants.
Yeah. My
Definitely.
prediction is that Colorado will be next. So
Oh
they
yeah.
had a pilot that was launched. I'd expect New York will look at something in the coming years, but Colorado is the only one that's come forward and stated it's like this is something we're working towards. So we expect they're looking at California as kind of the first foray into it to see what's going to happen. But they won't be the last state.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Kathleen asking, my tenant used her security deposit as last month's rent and left the place a mess. Could I recover the last month's rent?
Yeah, so I think it depends upon your jurisdiction. I'm assuming that that is not allowed in the jurisdiction that she is in, and therefore that last month's rent is still owing. They'll want to be careful, of course. Did they have any requirement to return that security deposit within a certain number of days? That exists in certain legislation. And then, of course, for the damages, you do need to get an order that quantifies the damages to be able to report it. But for the unpaid rent, you do not need the order.
Right.
A,
And then
a rule
go
of
ahead.
thumb. Yeah, sorry, I'll just say a rule of thumb that we have with that. It's like look at what the language is in your lease,
Mhm.
that's written. So sometimes that security deposit is actually last month's rent, which at which point in time, like if they leave and that is actually their last month's rent, then of course that would apply. If it is a security deposit that can't be used for rent, then most likely you're unpaid. So again, it helps to go back and look at what's written in that contract to determine kind of your next steps. But of course, the damages need the jurisdiction or going to the judgment.
Hmm. Also, Sam asking, husband and wife are both named on the lease. Can I report both of them and what would be the price?
Yeah, you would report both of them and for the full amount on both of their credit reports.
And then as far as pricing goes with FrontLobby, would that be considered one lease?
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, so even
And
even if there's four or five, tenants living in the unit, it's still just one lease.
got it. So it's per lease agreement. That counts as going towards the 20 in the premium plan.
That's right.
Gotcha. Okay. Patricia asking about the debt reporting, which is different than the rent reporting. She's confirming $99 per person reported. Um,
Per lease.
yeah,
So let's
per
use
per
using the
lease,
situation you just
per
said. So if
lease.
that couple had moved out with a debt,
Mhm.
it's $99 and one-time payment, and you get to report both.
Gotcha. Okay.
And you keep 100% of the amount that you collect versus say a collection agency, which is of course going to take a significant percentage of the rent of the amount collected.
Yes, I think that's really the biggest thing is just for so long, we just haven't really had an easy option, at least for small landlords, to do that. So they sort of felt like, what do you do other than use a collection agency? But now you have the power to report. So that's
Yeah.
definitely something you can just keep all for yourself. Okay, another one here. What if our tenants are not US citizens and have no credit? Uh, I think I asked this in one of the scenario-based questions, but if they're not citizens, they don't have a social. That's another question I think that came up quite a few times. Is that something that can still be reported?
Yeah. So whether they have a social or not doesn't matter, right? So again, reiterate, you need a date of birth, which you should be capturing during the application process, probably on their driver's license or other forms of ID. Um, when you're dealing with someone that is new to country, there's two things. So when you're reporting them on the positive side, you should if they're new to the country, they may not have a credit file, and that's okay because you're reporting their positive rental payments, and that actually starts helping them build up their credit file, which is really beneficial. It happens on the other side too. So if, when I moved to the US the first time, I didn't have any credit file, but as stuff starts to get reported, whether that's debt or on-time payments, I eventually build that up, and you can grow from there. Where it becomes challenging is when and we deal with this where you have maybe a student that comes and then they move back home. And, if they're leaving the country, your rental debt that's getting reported is specifically to the US credit bureaus. And so if they leave the US, right, then there's not really a whole lot that it happens unless someone else is searching for the US credit file. So it's still worth doing. It's just important to know that when you're dealing with someone that's truly net new, if they don't have any sort of credit file, it can take a couple months before that information gets furnished and they actually develop a credit file. Equifax or TransUnion, they don't just quickly create one. It often takes a couple months before they actually create a credit file for an individual. So there just may be an additional delay, but you can definitely do it on both the positive and the negative side for someone that is new to the country.
Yeah, and that would really help them get a good start here. So definitely good for them too. Janet asking, once they pay, can you remove it completely from their credit report, or does it just show as paid?
Yeah, it gets updated to show it as paid. So the
Gotcha.
credit bureaus don't want information removed unless it's inaccurate. And ultimately you don't either. Like the explicit language that if something gets paid off, you can't just delete it and remove it as a benefit to the tenants. It's accurate information that was reported as a creditor. So essentially what happens is it gets closed, meaning it's no longer active. It shows a $0 balance. And then over time, the impact of that, of course, goes away. And future creditors can see that, all right, this individual paid off the debt that they had.
Hmm. Okay. Let's see. California assisted housing. Can I report the unpaid portion by the tenant who is Section 8 housing? Another question about rent stabilized units in New York City came up as well. Is there any distinction that you know of that makes it different for Section 8 or for New York City stabilized?
No.
Yeah, not that we're aware of, no.
Love that. Okay, easy question, easy answer. Um, Debbie asks, is there an option to have the resident pay the fee directly to you?
Yeah.
Sorry,
Go
God,
ahead. Go ahead, Zach. Yeah.
Yeah, so yes, there is. So what the landlord could do is they could provide them with the information, the one pager of how this works to their tenant, and the tenant can sign up themselves at FrontLobby and pay directly to FrontLobby. And then what will happen is their landlord will get a notification, an email notification that excuse me, this lease has been created and asking them to confirm that it is accurate. So yes, that is possible.
Okay, trying to see if there's any other questions here that we haven't already covered. There's plenty. I mean, we have 45 questions, but some of them are, I think, what we already covered, or maybe like the same questions over and over. Let me see if I can find any fresh ones here. Just a moment. Oh, interesting. I don't know about this one. Alan's asking, in California, are you legally allowed to refuse to lease to a prospective tenant who chooses not to opt in to rent reporting, both
No.
positive and negative?
Yeah, I would say no to that. So, I mean, that it doesn't explicitly state that, but offering this is a requirement. So, meaning if the tenant's living there, they can choose whether to do it or not. And if there's a
Yeah.
debt, consent isn't required anyways. So at that standpoint, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah,
What
and
I
I
would,
think, go ahead.
oh, you're probably going this way too. It's like, there's a lot of HUD rules that have come out recently around making sure that you're not discriminating against individuals. But if someone is adamant when I'm screening them for my rental property and they're saying, hey, I really don't want I don't want potential debts to be reported. Like to me, that's a bit of a red flag that I'm going to dig into a little bit
Mhm.
more.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is. And I do want to reiterate that again for those of you, I mean, we can't repeat it enough. You can report tenants debts without their consent if they owe you the debt, right? It's a debt.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's different, right? So
Yeah.
that's definitely worth noting. Someone did
Yeah.
bring up a recent case. I'm not sure if you all are familiar with it. I'd love to maybe follow up with people on this one. It's a recent court decision. John Maisel, SPE owner, LLC versus Sage. There was a ruling that supposedly established that a property owners cannot report unpaid rent to credit agencies before a legal resolution. So I'd like to kind of look into that a little bit more, but federally, I believe it's just, I mean, and you all know more about this than I do, that it is, if it is a debt, that it certainly is something that can be reported.
Yeah, yes, I would enjoy reading that case. With any case, there's always a lot of unique aspects to it that result in it going one way or another. And so I'm not familiar with that particular case, but I hope that person will share with us. Section 623 of the Fair Credit Reporting Act, and then their corresponding furnisher rule. So that's published by the Federal Trade Commission and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and it enables landlords to furnish tenant information to credit bureaus. So with a couple caveats, so long as the landlord provides accurate and complete information and investigates tenants' disputes of the accuracy of that furnished information. So essentially, the federal legislation, yes, does allow this. This has been, confirmed with, of course, all of the bureaus as well, credit bureaus, and the regulatory bodies whom we interact with regularly, specifically when information is disputed, because it happens, that something can be incorrectly entered or someone can be mistaken, and so there's a well-established process for dealing with that.
Thanks for clarifying. That was great. Partha asking, I need a lease clause for reporting for Florida. So I know we gave everyone the California one because you're required to give it. But do you have a lease clause that might be like more generic, like national, that anybody can use just to add to their lease?
Yeah, absolutely. So go to frontlobby.com, and in the footer of our website, there will be free lease clauses that they can add.
Nice. Okay, great.
I think it's also one of the links that you posted, Alexandra. So there's two things, like the lease
Mm.
clauses, which are generic. We also have clauses that you can put in your applications. And then there's the California specific notice. So there's actually three different things that you can add to it.
Okay, great. Those are great resources to add. Vicky saying, how do you handle a tenant who moved out illegally a third of the way through the lease with FrontLobby?
Yeah. So I'm going to share best practices here because, I'll caveat to say most likely they owe you some lease breakage fee, some rent, those sorts of components. What we look for is report the unpaid rent or utilities while they lived in the property and then pursue a judgment for any additional lease breakage fees or those sorts of components. The reason why is that information is very likely to get disputed by the tenant. They say, hey, I moved out, like I paid up until I moved, or I only owe the month's rent. Why are you reporting 3 or 4 months rent? And there's usually very specific actions that you must take as a landlord in order to try and re-rent that property. Specific things that we're just not in any position to kind of judge whether you've taken the appropriate actions, which is why we require judgment for those lease breakage components. So yes, start by saying that's a crappy situation. Sorry to hear that. You likely are owed some additional rent, but in order to make sure that what you report stays on the credit file, only report unpaid rent and utilities while they lived in the property, then go through appropriate channels, try and obtain that judgment. When you get that, simply update the balance if there's anything still outstanding. That's how you'd end up handling those situations.
Hey, thanks for going through that because that does happen, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Let's see here. The landlords generally prefer to avoid adversarial relationships with their tenants. Therefore, if a dispute arises regarding reporting rent, can a landlord reverse the reporting? Is it as easy as pushing a button?
Go ahead, Grant.
Well,
You deal with this one regularly.
yeah. So maybe just let me just think through So when you're updating the information, like if anything's inaccurate, we can update it. So if you know, and this happens, like if you recognize that information you reported is wrong, let us know right away. We can update the credit bureaus. You can update the FrontLobby system to make sure that information gets updated. If it's just that things get paid and there's now a change in the balance that they're owing, those can simply be made within the platform and it gets updated the next time that reporting happens. So most of it is pretty simple as long as you're kind of reporting on the go forward basis. Historical stuff that gets updated, it's a bit more. It just requires that you contact us just because we want the data that has been reported to match what information is within FrontLobby. So then there's clear visibility to both you and the tenant. And so that's why there's just that extra step if the information has been reported.
Great. Lots of questions about the recording. So I'm going to just pause for a moment, let y'all know that you are getting the recording tomorrow. And of course, the ability to still schedule a time to talk to the FrontLobby team. All of the resources we discussed today, we'll have links to that as well. So anything that we've covered, like the addendums, that will be in the follow-up email. So definitely check your email tomorrow. I'm going to try to send it by the end of the day. Also, another question that came in, let's see. I thought in California, I thought the tenants can opt in or out. With FrontLobby, is there a fee for landlords and tenants? So I think we already answered this. It's really could be either or, right? In California, you can charge for the operate on that at all.
Yeah, it can be either or. So either the landlord could pay for it or the renter could pay for it. And that's correct. The renter is able within the tenant portal through our platform to opt in or out of positive reporting. So again, if there's a debt owed, they can't opt out of that being reported, but they can opt out of having their on-time payments be reported.
The other thing that I'll add, not specific to California, is that certain jurisdictions allow you to report technology fees or other things onto your tenants. And so not California, but if this is something you want to provide for individuals, you can sometimes pass on the fees of operating FrontLobby to those individuals as well.
Yeah, Sharon asking, can late fees be included in the past due rents? I'm in California.
Yeah, for these, if they're explicitly outlined in the lease and they abide by your local jurisdiction. So you can't just determine what it is, but if it's clearly outlined and it's, owed by law, then yes.
Yeah, and there are many jurisdictions that do not allow that anymore.
Right.
So definitely worth consulting with your attorney to see if that is something you can still charge and enforce. Okay. Going back up here to see if there's anything else we didn't cover. There was Eddie did mention a comment saying that if you get a judgment, you can file for a FIFA. The FIFA will last 7 years. So you can renew it before the end of the 7 years to extend the judgment. Is that something you've come across as well in your time, Zach?
That is not actually. Grant, have you guys seen that situation?
I have what we often have defaulted to is what the credit bureaus actually accept. So, there's a difference between what you're legally owed and kind of duration of judgments. I haven't looked specifically into the FIFA component, but I know in other situations where you do have, debts that have been longer outstanding, even though if there has been an update on the judgment, like unfortunately, the credit bureaus will only allow that information to be reported for that 7 years. So we can look deeper into the specific FIFA situation, but I'd assume it fall under their general bucket of wanting that debt to fall off just to make sure that that individual isn't hurt in perpetuity for a debt. Whether you believe that's right or wrong, that's essentially what the credit bureaus have established that term for.
Hmm. Okay, well, it's good to stick to the guideline. Joel saying here, can I be copied or BCC'd on the yearly auto notification to the tenants?
Yeah, so within the platform, you're able to see all the different notifications that can go out to the tenants, and then you're able to turn on a simple toggle switch that ensures that you get BCC'd on them all. And you can
Nice.
also always see them because you can go into what's called the activity tracker within the platform, and you can pull up and see what emails have been sent to those tenants for all time. So there's always a record within the platform, but if you want it sent to your email as well, you can do that.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah, I mean, I would probably forget. So it's good that the system does it. And Brendan's asking, California, do you have to provide notice if the property is exempt?
Not that I know of. There's no legislation that explicitly says that you have to let someone know that this doesn't apply to you. It's really just you have to let your tenants know about it if it applies.
If it does, yeah.
Yep. So if it doesn't
Okay.
apply to you, there's no action you need to take. I mean, we talked about best practices, but you don't have to specifically mention this legislation to your tenants.
Okay. Um, I am starting to come over here to the last of our questions. Grace asked an interesting one. I have ended a tenant's tenancy. There's a holdover, and we are starting the eviction process. Can we report holdover rent during the eviction process?
Hmm. What is holdover rent?
I think what she's trying to say is that they're still living there during the eviction trial or process. So can you report that rent while the that they owe you while they're living there while the eviction process is occurring?
Yeah, I did. I'm going to assume this one might be in, did you say it was in New York?
No, they
I
didn't
Okay.
say.
I dealt with one recently in New York that was specifically around holdover payments,
Mm,
and diving deeper into it, it looked like that information couldn't get reported. And it
mm,
was specifically that, I mean, each holdover situation can be slightly different, but there was so much ambiguity around this case with the holdover that, it ended up not being able to report that information. So, I mean, if you're dealing with a holdover situation and you want some help with it, feel free to let us know. Um, in a few of the situations that I've dealt with, the holdover hasn't been able to be reported just based on the legislation or what's currently going on. So that one
mm.
again is really tricky, and it's a very edge case that I've only encountered a couple times in the past several years. So hopefully it doesn't apply to most people because that's a really tough situation to be in. But
Yeah,
that's one of them.
absolutely. Definitely an attorney needs to help you with that because
Yeah,
you don't want to mess up the eviction process in that case,
yeah.
especially in New York. Okay. So let's see. Is there a way to report roommates, bad roommates? So I suppose if they're on the lease, what if they're not on the lease though?
Well, if they're not on a lease, they're an occupant, which means that they're not responsible to the rent for the rent. So
Hmm.
if they're not a signatory on the contract, you can't report them.
Yeah, I always tell our members that the more parties you can get on the lease, the better, and not just exclude someone just because you didn't necessarily, they're not the breadwinner, right? You want to
Hmm?
make sure that they're both on the lease, even if they're contributing just a little bit.
For
Um,
sure.
yeah.
You can also report guarantors.
Mm,
That was mentioned earlier with the commercial leases, but it does apply to residential as well. So if Zach and I are living together and I don't pay rent and yet he's paying on time and we have a guarantor, all three of us, essentially that debt will hit our credit file. And that's helpful because it does provide that social pressure. So everyone that is a signatory on the lease is responsible for the full amount of that rental payment by contract. So that means they all get benefit for the full payment and they all get dinged if there is non-payment. Now,
mm,
we usually don't recommend adding a guarantor for the positive side. You can keep that in your back pocket. This happens with students fairly often, right? Their parents act as a guarantor. Most of the parents they won't opt into having their payments reported anyways, but
mm.
reporting that guarantor from the negative side is definitely an option that you have if you need that additional leverage.
Interesting. Another interesting question, Brian asking about bankruptcies. Does this stick through the process?
No, from the standpoint that, if it happens beforehand, you're essentially going to be one of the creditors that gets run through that bankruptcy protocol. So another good benefit, like, I don't know, a few times a month, we actually get bankruptcy filings where we're listed as the creditor and, we kick them back to the housing provider that's actually owed the money. But, having it on the credit file is a good way to make sure that you're in those conversations when they go through that bankruptcy proceeding. But when someone goes through bankruptcy, the credit bureaus essentially take everything that's beforehand and wipe it out, and you end up having just the bankruptcy that exists. Now, their credit, of course, is going to be shot, but you want to make sure that you're in the conversation to ensure that you're getting the component that is owed for you through the payment plan that they come up with.
Okay. All right, great. So I'm checking out any other questions here, and I don't think I see anything different than what we've covered already, but there are still a lot of questions. The only other one I see here is if you have any software integrations with Yardi or Appfolio. So that might be a good one to end on.
Yes, we are integrated with Yardi.
Wonderful. Okay, well, if any of you use Yardi, then you'll have an even easier way to set this up, I'm sure. But we'll end it there because I think really from here, what we can do is any of those like really specific scenario questions, I'm going to forward all the questions over to the FrontLobby team so that they can answer individually with your, specifics and reach out to you. And then we're also, again, sending the recording and all the resources and slides to everyone by tomorrow, end of day. So please take a look at your emails. And again, if you need to schedule something sooner than that, there's the QR code on the screen. So make sure that you scan that. And I would love to hear your thoughts in the exit survey as you're leaving. Please answer the questions. We have a couple questions about what you thought about this presentation and also about rent reporting. So would love to hear your opinions there. And with that all said, thank you so much for sticking around, Grant and Zach, and answering everyone's questions. I think we probably had close to 100 questions. So thank you so much for giving us the extra time.
Thank you very much for having us. Thank you everyone for attending, and we look forward to helping you.
All right,
Likewise,
everyone.
thank you.
Have a wonderful day. We will see you next week on our next webinar, which will be about taxes. So for tax time, I'll include an invite as well to that. So have a wonderful day, everyone. Take care. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.